internet connectivity and bandwidth. We're all going to be going to these venues, and streaming is definitely part of the conversation. So any tips or tricks that we can provide the audience so as they're planning for this and looking at venues and asking those questions that they should be thinking about?
Well, I would start with looking at talking to your production crews and upfront asking what they need, because what they're going to need, what you need for your team with dedicated lines, you're going to want dedicated lines. You want to make sure that you have all that information up front. So you can have your ask at once as you start asking for things closer in. That could help your cost go up. I know this whole internet things are, centers are trying to figure things out, and there's a lot of conversation around this right now. But as you were saying, looking at what rooms you're using, and maybe even holistically looking at what the speed you need overall, and if you can split some of those lines, you could possibly look at cost savings the way, depending on how things are organized, and also really looking at not just your production, but then your consumption. So now that the world has been online for a year, I think, Laurel, you brought it up about people consuming different ways if they're going to be online, and you want to make sure that you have that support too. So that's definitely going to be a huge, big consumption piece that we haven't done before.
Yeah, and I think something we talked about in preparation for this was around the scheduling piece too, right? And making sure that when you're thinking about bandwidth and what your budget is and what's available even at the venue, because there's going to be limitations in a lot of cases. So if you're planning to do, just like, let's say, for example, you said, okay, one stream is what we can do. It's looking at scheduling so that sessions that you really want to have available in that live moment are all in that room. And I know it's a different way to kind of think about scheduling at an event, allowing the technology to drive that, but it is something to consider, and something I've seen done a lot over the years, and it works really well to apply a strategy like that. And I would say, even as we move into this new environment, I think even the people who are in person, attending conferences in person, are going to have a lot of flexibility with that. They're going to understand that this is something that we've got to kind of rethink the way we're doing it on site, knowing that there's so many more people who are online and participating. So there is going to be some forgiveness that needs to happen from that as well.
And it might be kind of refreshing, Hilary. I mean, if you think about, there's this old tried and true format, right, of like kind of mid-morning is the keynote, then you go into the breakouts, and maybe that gets turned on its head and jumbled up, and the social event is mid-morning, or something like that. Like that, there's something kind of cool and interesting about that. So that could be a neat place to innovate.
Absolutely. Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say absolutely. Go ahead, Laurel. I'm sorry.
I was thinking about, I keep having this like doomsday thought about, like, in Vegas, like every single hotel and all the convention centers doing hybrid events at the same time. And does our infrastructure in general support that? And it's going to be interesting to see. We don't know. We've never tried. So it's going to be an interesting moment. And there, you can bring in independent companies to provide internet access. And we've done that with tech companies because their audience in particular is not very forgiving of losing connectivity. And so they see it as mission critical to have it. And I'm wondering if that's really going to expand now as we move back into in-person spaces with all of these broadband requirements.
You bring up a really good point about what else is happening in the hotel, right? It's like when you're planning an event and you want to know what is being used in the space, it's now, what is being used on the internet and testing. But to Hilary, to your point about live streaming and which rooms, absolutely, that's going to drive it, which is key. If you have sessions you want to stream, but they're not in your live streaming rooms, or scheduling wise, it doesn't make sense because you now have a global audience. One thing you can do is you can record sessions. We had an event, this was a couple years ago, we had an event in Berlin, Germany, a medical event, but a lot of the audience was in the States. So we captured the morning sessions in Germany, live streamed their afternoon sessions, which were the sessions in the morning in the States, and then took the recorded sessions and added it on the back end. So our event kind of went longer, but even if you have internet restrictions on the streaming, there's creative ways that you can take those captures and kind of put together a blended approach with the event. So just wanted to throw that in there too, if people are kind of struggled with that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's such a good point, Jen. And making sure too, when you do have those dedicated rooms, I know one of you mentioned it earlier, but with the moderator, because it's definitely the bandwidth, but when we think about tech requirements, it's also making sure that if you're going to have moderators in the room, that looking at the whole layout and making sure that you've got, I know in the past, we'd always have that dedicated microphone, making sure there's a network connection for that moderator, because they're going to be online and engaging with that remote audience. You don't want them to have any issues. So it's thinking through those different elements. You've got the stage, you've got the moderator, the back of the room where your texts are going to be. There's different touch points throughout. And something else too, I know that microphones obviously are always, for the most part, available to the audience members, but I think now more than ever, it's super critical to make sure that your audience has the ability to speak the question over the mics. And the training of the presenters to make sure they're repeating the question, because these are all things that the audience online will miss out on if there's not enough care taken in the room to get those things in place for people.
That's such a great point, Hilary. I saw that a lot with what we were playing around with in our hybrid lab, where in person the audience has gotten a bit small. And so if you're in a situation where you have like 10 or 20 people in the room for a presentation, all of a sudden those people feel like they're in a conversation with the speaker, and so they just shout out questions from their chair. It's very comfortable, and we're all used to doing that. And so getting retrained as how to be a good audience member for the remote audience. And I always tell clients to have at least one volunteer in each room who's like the wrangler, essentially, that's making sure that people are following the correct protocol so that the remote audience can also feel like they're participating. It's really hard to break our old habits.
Oh, it's so true.